My name is Chidi. I'm a professor of human resource management at King's College London, and I'll be chairing today's session. Just before I introduce, I'll let my co-speakers introduce themselves. I'll just give you a kind of general context as to what we are discussing today in this session. When we think about borders, we often look at borders in the literal sense. So think about things like um, national boundaries or geography. But in reality, borders mean more than just national boundaries. Borders could mean things that impact our lives, or could also have different dimensions in terms of our identities, our cultural experiences, or our social identity. So if you think about, for example, um, the distinction between one's experience as a manager versus one's experience as an employee, or another example could be someone in a leadership position um, experiencing events and life in a different way from someone who is a subordinate. So all these different experiences have an effect on what we see as the transitions between our work, our life, and our general experiences with individuals around us. So we think we're going to discuss borders in a broad sense, looking at its social, professional, organizational, and cultural dimensions. And we have two experts today who will join us, who will help us delve into this topic in more detail. But before I let my co-speakers introduce themselves, a couple of housekeeping information. We've got participants online who are also listening to us today. So if you're online and you would want to ask a question um, in this session, you would do that by clicking on the live button on your screen and just type in your questions. And when we get to the question and answer session, I'll read out your question to our panel. And for those of us in the room, what we plan today is to have our experts introduce themselves. I have a couple of pre-planned questions for our experts, and once we've done that, I'll open it up to the audience to ask any questions you might have for us today. All right? So over to you. I'll start with Yvonne.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. My name is Yvonne Benschop, at least that's my international name. I'm actually Yvonne Benschop, but that is for the Dutch. And I'm really happy to be here. I crossed a literal border to be here and to think about, and that literal border has changed, right? Now I need to go to passport control, and that sort of bugs me every time, like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, Brexit, passport control. So borders in that sense are real, and there's borders that each and every one of us crosses every day, and that's the one between work and life. And we have come up with this idea of work-life balance as, I don't know, a fantasy, somebody says about that. And I think that is what it is, a fantasy. So the whole idea of that there would be two separate domains, and one is work and one is life, is weird. In our everyday experiences, that is something that feels strange. And if you put a dichotomy like that, work and life, to a feminist like me, I immediately start deconstructing it. And there is a large actual feminist heritage to this, because there used to be a big debate about the public and the private. And that is a debate that is not done. In the Netherlands, there's currently a big thing in the media about gender-based violence, because of some young girl of 17 was murdered when she was driving her bike. That's also something that we do, driving bikes, another border. But she was murdered biking home alone at 3 a.m. in the morning. And then there was a whole thing about her being alone. And now there is a whole thing about the place of women in the public sphere. Why can't they drive alone? Why is that being an issue? Okay, so back to work life. When work life is separated, when work becomes part of life, we don't tend to think about that as a problem. When work spills over in life, you are seen oftentimes as somebody who's really committed. So I've been a scholar all my life. My friends who are not scholars think that I make crazy work hours. And they think, where's the room for life for you? But colleagues, academics tend to think, yeah, but that's how we do it, right? We put in long hours. And for those of you who were here for yesterday's panel, you also heard about the need to do hard work and the need to make long hours. So what that does to life goes under the radar, maybe, because some people can do that, but they usually are people that are sustained by others in life to make sure that they can do the work that they do. So that is when work spills over in life. There's also a time when life spills over in work. We've had multiple panel sessions talking about that. When people are sick, when people are faced with disabilities. So there's multiple ways that that can happen. And that is oftentimes framed as problematic and seen as the people who do not give work priority over life are seen as of lesser quality in work. And it comes really with career consequences, which is also problematic, very problematic, because of all the intersectional inequalities that come with that.
Thank you. I'll come back to you with more questions, but let's just have Carly introduce herself first before we go into some.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Callie Hamerton-Stove. I am one of the founders of the Glasshouse. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Glasshouse so you can understand why I might be here to talk about borders. 6 years ago, my co-founder Melissa visited a prison in Kent called HMP Sutton Park. It's an open women's prison. It's where women can go if they've had a really good behavior and they've kind of checked all the boxes during their experience at prison. In that last year to 2 years, they get to go to an open prison where they can go out on day release for social or work release. When she went, she noticed that they were having a lot of reoffending. The rates were sky high, higher than men. And she was hearing about some of the problems the prison was dealing with, including women finding safe places to live after prison and women being able to find jobs so they could actually support themselves after prison. And these things were just not available to women coming out of custody at that time. And as she was touring the prison, she noticed that they had disused greenhouses in the back of the gardens. There were 4 massive industrial greenhouses, and she left thinking there are these empty facilities that look to be in good shape. They're having these problems. Women can't find work. They can't support themselves. Is there anything we can do with existing facilities to address that? So the Glasshouse came out of that, and she came to me, and we wrote a business plan and went to the Ministry of Justice. And we basically started a program in those greenhouses to train women, to prepare them for employment in horticulture. And we focus on installation and maintenance in the corporate environment in offices. So we train the women there how to prepare and pot and plant and raise and propagate plants, but also then how to maintain them in an office environment. And that we place them in employment as they work through the system. So that's the Glasshouse. But I think in terms of borders, in my experience, obviously these women have hard borders. They have literal borders of the prison walls, of being able to leave, that of whatever their kind of social background is. There are probably some borders there as well. There definitely are. But I think in my experience, certainly listening to Yvonne talk about this work-life balance and the borders that exist in our minds around what that looks like, it's very different for people from vulnerable backgrounds and from these socially challenged areas. And work is life, it's basically that's how they function. And for these women specifically, we've definitely noticed that, the borders for them are almost like self-inflicted borders, almost borders for them to work through, understanding they have value to society, understanding that they can be in a professional environment and are worthy of that, understanding they have skills and that they can learn and they have that capacity. So I think borders have such a wide kind of potential to understand not only how we work, across hard borders and literal borders, but also how we work as a society and a community together, and helping people who might have borders that they perceive, helping them break through those borders, I think is really important as well.
Thanks, Kelly. You know what? When I did my introduction, I said we often think of borders in terms of geography, but I kind of we should also think of borders in terms of the wider social experiences we have. And from Kali's narrative, I started thinking about how borders could actually have the intersection between geography as well as social experiences. So, for example, you said these women are within the walls of a prison. So that's the geographical border. But at the same time, they have the social experience, which adds another layer, an extra layer of that experience to them. So that's an interesting point. But I'll go back to Yvonne for a second. In your experience, in your view, when you talk about work-life balance, for example, as an example of transitions between borders, we know that border is blurry now because you have people don't necessarily know what work is or how they differentiate work from life. In your experience, how do people or how should people navigate that blurred borders when it comes to work and personal life experiences?
That is a difficult question because I think that so part of that is an individual preference. So some people really thrive when all kinds of activities smoothly go from one into the other. And other people thrive when they can make strict borders between different spheres of life. I thrive when I can go on holidays and then completely pull the plug. So when I'm away for holidays, I don't work. But other people love to keep on working and they don't want to come back and then find that pile of work. They just want to keep doing that. And I think part of this framing it as choice and individual preference is also a problem, because it might be an individual preference for some. It is a very hard life experience for others that cannot have these choices, but really have to deal with all the inequalities that are there. And I think what Callie is talking about is really a very good experience of that. When as you said, work is life, right? You really need work, then it is really very much a privilege to have a choice in that, and not have that seen as an individual responsibility of people. And we have become so used of thinking about work choices as responsibilities. And when people make different choices that may not be choices, to see that as something that says something about their quality or about their ambition for that matter, where it might not have anything to do with that. And ambition is also something that I've done some research on, and I've seen that ambitions are constructed differently in that research for women and men. So women's scarce ambitions were taken so seriously that people just took them out of work, because the proposition was that they would want to care. And men's care ambitions were not taken seriously. They were not supposed to go for work. So there's so many different stereotypes and preferences that come into play here. It's very hard to give this one clear answer.
I agree. And also, I think because we navigate life in different ways. I mean, my experience is different from your experience, is different from your experience. The choices we make can sometimes be influenced by what we have in our social surroundings. And so there is no fast or no right answer or no wrong answer to the way we navigate or we deal with the social borders we find ourselves, we find around our existence. But to Kali, I have a question. Given this context of no right or wrong answer in terms of how we navigate social borders, are there, in your experience, any organizational policies or any political practices, any kind of broader institutional factors that could at least support individuals when navigating social borders?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's something, as I was preparing to be here and reading, thinking about my work in terms of borders, I thought about some of the training that we provide. And I think this is something that in a management or institutional kind of organization could be relevant. We really work with the women to kind of develop their personal brand. And then from there, we can then determine what they kind of want to achieve, what they feel their skills are, what they see as their kind of hope or dream, and then kind of look at their potential to reach that. But in that, we really work on making sure they understand what it is to be professional, what it is to work in an in the environment in which we hope that we can place them after they leave custody. And I think from an organizational standpoint, there's a lot of support that can be given for people who don't have experience or who feel undervalued or unsure about being in that environment. And I think sometimes it can feel quite simplistic, but I think kind of backing up and opening up organizations to a more diverse and population, but then also kind of making it accessible to them is a really important part of bringing in people from these kind of vulnerable places into organizations. And I think I feel that that's improving a lot in management, but I feel like certainly with women who are in prison, it still has a long way to go, I think. So
thank you. There's a lot to unpack here, but for the sake of time, I'll just have one last question for our experts, and it's to both of you, and then I'll open it up to the audience. So the question I have is, so from what I've heard, we've talked about vulnerability, we've talked about inequalities, so the different dimensions that inequality could take. I guess the question I have for both of you, I'll start with Yvonne, is what can we learn from each other in addressing these vulnerabilities, these inequalities, when it comes to navigating social borders? So essentially, what practical steps should we keep in mind when it comes to addressing the vulnerabilities and inequalities that come with navigating the different dimensions of our borders, our social borders?
Thank you for that question. I think there is one thing that we can do, and that is not go at it alone, but definitely build communities. I really like the idea of that we can build communities of change. And if we can build communities of change, that could mean that we can collaborate. And the people that definitely need to be in those communities are the people with the minoritized experiences, because they can tell what it is that needs to change in that organization for them to thrive there. But we also need experts, people who know about diversity, equality, inclusion, because they are the people that know how they can make the changes. And we need leaders to step up their game and to be really putting themselves and all their power behind these ideas. So if these people team up in communities, I have some hope that change is possible.
Thank you, Yvonne. Kali, do you have something to add?
I mean, the only thing I would add in terms of crossing these borders, especially these perceived borders, is sometimes an individual has a lot more power than maybe an organization. And so within that organization, making sure you have individuals who are listeners, who are open-minded, who are really kind of key to helping people get through those kind of borders that they feel like they have. I think that is an important part of creating any kind of plan in the long run to break down those borders in an organization.
Thank you. I'll just add mine before I open it up to the audience. I've in recent years, so as I said earlier, I'm a HR researcher, and in the last couple of years, I've done a lot of work in the global south, looking at farmers or informal workers and people who are not necessarily in the typical stereotype of organizational work. And what I find is some of the things we believe to be organizational policies do not necessarily apply to people in certain contexts. So if you take, for example, a smallholder farmer is also a worker, but when you talk about HR policies, they do not necessarily experience that. So I think one of the practical steps we should embrace is keeping an open mind to the broader experiences of social borders beyond what we experience in our immediate environment. Because once you leave this room and open yourself up to a broader or a different cultural setting, you find out that some of the things you think you know about social borders may not necessarily apply to a different context or a different experience where people have different exposures to risks, to vulnerabilities, and inequality. So I just thought I would share that in addition to what Yvonne and Kali have said. I think I need to also keep this with me because I'll take questions from the online audience as well. But if you, does anyone have any questions for the panel? Yes, someone at the back. He goes first and then you go second. No, you go second. Yes, the first person at the back first.
Hi. Thank you. Hi, Ramin Bender Salazar. Thank you to the panelists. My question has to do with kind of the, meritocracy or the illusion thereof, and specifically looking at hidden curriculum with all of these jobs. And I think it's within academia, but also with all things. There is what they say there is to get a job or to do success in professional life, but then there's also all these hidden things, which may be more difficult for minoritized groups, for neurodiverse groups. And I think one thing I'm curious about is specifically also with academia, but also elsewhere, how do we navigate this idea that it's difficult for people that are doing the hiring and also for advancing in organizations? They probably didn't have the same circumstances or the same criteria that they are now upholding, yet they now uphold it kind of with kind of draconian. So I think what I'm considering is how do we look at meritocracy and hidden curriculum within like work life?
Thank you. Do you want to go first there?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think the whole idea of meritocracy, it's a myth, right? Everybody knows that that is the case. But it's a beautiful myth. Without it, it would also become very difficult. But in terms of answering your question, I think the best way to go about that is to make sure that we have intersubjectivity in the panels that hire and that go with applications. Because if you have people looking from different perspectives and with different life experiences and have them then discuss, that it might be that merit presents itself in a very, very different way, right? We've had these huge discussions about international experience, right? Does international experience actually mean that academics pick up their whole life, go elsewhere, spend it there, have no time to sort of build roots, take their whole family or not? So it's way easier if people are completely unencumbered. So many of the things in the hidden curriculum are based on ideal workers. But ideal workers do not exist, and they have never existed. If you really look at who is an ideal worker, there is such a small group of people that actually adheres to those qualities that is neglectable, and definitely not the people you will find coming up for you to have something to say about in promotion or in recruitment decisions. So I would go with intersubjectivity to the best of your abilities.
There's something to add.
I don't think so. I mean, the only thing I would say is, you know, in my experience of developing an organization, you know, making sure that I think, you know, it's a changing world, and I think making sure people understand what's expected of them is the only thing that really creates success in a culture. And so, in that way, you know, meritocracy could work if you're really communicative and open and inclusive. So I don't have a lot to say about it, except I think that it's ideal. So I don't ideological, exactly.
Well, thank you. I'm just thinking, I mean, the other way to look at the same question is, how do you define merit? Because merit in itself is subjective. So if we talk about meritocracy, then we need to ensure that what we define as merit is fair and objective enough to be applied to individuals across different circumstances. But again, I agree with the panel. I mean, how do you define these things? Because they're very subjective, subjective in a way. Thank you very much for the question. I think we've got a second person.
Hi, this is Shana from Australian Institute of Business. Thank you so much, panelists, for the fantastic insights. As you were talking about the work-life balance, this reminded me of in-groups and out-groups as well, which we see in the organizations. Some people who go beyond what is expected and some people do bare minimum. So what are your thoughts, or how do we navigate such challenges when we have some people who are doing beyond expectation and they are exerting some sort of, pressure on the outgroups as well? So how do you see that happening in the organization? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I guess that was to me, right? Yeah. Just go for the mic. Thank you. Yeah, I think makes for a difficult dynamic because it tends to be so valued to go the extra mile. So that and if the in-group does that, that is seen as a I'm looking for the right word, as a pro for that in-group. It's like something that they excel at. What goes beyond the radar is that maybe not everybody can actually do that, even has the ability to go the extra mile. And maybe it is also from the part of the organization, going the extra mile might look like a really good idea in the long run, in the short run, but what do you do with people who constantly overwork in the long run? They run a risk of burning out. And they run a risk of health issues and mental health issues. And that does not go only with long hours, but I guess that making sure that you have a sound work culture that does not reward excess work might be a good idea. But again, that's a longer term perspective, and I'm not sure that each and every entrepreneur will agree with me on this.
You want to say something?
I mean, the only thing I would say is, as we train women, many of these women don't have experience in the work environment, so have never worked before that we are training, and we really try to create an environment where they learn how to create boundaries for themselves for work, as well as breaking down boundaries. They have to know that they know people shouldn't be taking advantage of their eagerness to and appreciation of having work so that they work all hours or taken advantage of to go far beyond what's healthy. And so I think creating, a lot of training and a lot of making information available about what is, again, expected and what is right within the culture of your organization. It's really important so so people understand that if people do go far beyond, that is obviously something you can't stop people from doing. It just happens, and maybe that will be rewarded. But I certainly think you have to make sure you reward that in a balance with other people who are boundaried and are clear about what they're able to do. And I think that it has to be part of the culture, at a very base level.
I'll add my point, but before I say my point, I just want to remind those online, please, if you have any questions, please type your questions down in the live chat, and I'll read out your question to everyone. I have a view on this, and for me, I ask myself one question: is what is this? What is the source of? Why is the person overworking themselves? What is the reason why that individual is overworking? In some cases, it could be that there is an imbalance in terms of privilege. So certain individuals in the group have better privilege and therefore do not need to work as hard as the individual who is sort of less privileged, who needs to work 3 times more to get noticed. So in that sense, so overworking in general is not good because it has an impact on well-being. But at the same time, I feel like there are institutional pressures, there are institutional constraints that kind of drive people into that type of unhealthy behavior because they want to get noticed, for example. And if you are in a less privileged position, then to get noticed, you have to do something that makes you stand out. And in an in-group, out-group situation, you find some individuals might see overworking as an avenue or as a channel to sort of get themselves noticed by their leader. So in my perspective, if I were in response to your question, I would always think about what is driving that behavior, and do we have institutional, organizational practices or structures that would help dismantle those pressures that drive individuals into such behavior? I guess that's sort of how I would approach that question, but yes.
What about the national factor, like about the national culture influencing this practice? Because like people from certain countries, say from Asian diaspora, they are known to overwork more than people from other diaspora. Because if you work with an Indian company, because I'm from India, I can see that people are working 24 hours. They are they have their timetable scheduled based on the European market, based on the Australian market, American market. So in that way, and especially in cultures where there has been a lot of historical pressure, that they think that they need to work all the time just to progress in the society. So what do you think that from your perspective, that borders, yes, but there's also other factors which may influence this practice?
Yes, thank you for that. I think that is a perfectly valid point, and also makes it really difficult for people because, as I was saying, right, this is not an individual choice. There can be factors that are absolutely driving this that an individual has no control over. From an organizational perspective, though, I find this problematic because of the well-being issues that entails, and also probably because of the performance issues that entails, because we do not become better when we work more necessarily. So I would think that is problematic for everybody, and the norms that are there, both at the level of countries and the level of organizations, that take advantage of that. So it's also a question of power relations, right? Who gets the benefit from these particular norms of working, and who gets the detrimental side of that? And that is usually the workers. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to take the conversation a little bit away from work, just to kind of add more context to what we're saying here. I don't know if the audience, if our experts have a view on, or maybe any examples of how people navigate borders in terms of interpersonal relationships. So now we're moving slightly away from the professional life to more interpersonal, more things that happen outside the organizational context. How do people how do people how do I put it? It's because inequalities exist everywhere, not just in the workplace, and these pressures we're talking about exist also outside the workplace. My question is, how do people address the pressures they experience in interpersonal relationships? Say, for example, navigating a relationship between your siblings, or so you have a different relationship with your siblings, maybe a bad relationship with your siblings, and then with your spouse, it's not so good, and then with your friends, it's better. So how do people navigate all those different non-work related borders in a way that is more sustainable? Are there examples of your examples you can give us on how people?
I guess for me and the women that we work with, I mean, I am trying to put it in context as you're saying that, but many of them have lost contact or been estranged from the family or the community they were maybe included in prior to custody. So part of the kind of process that we go through with them is learning how to not only build themselves up and build up their belief in themselves, because that is key to their success, but also kind of explore those relationships and what might have stopped them from continuing, or what potential there is. So, and again, I mean, I guess that could definitely be considered a border in their minds, because those feel really difficult to contemplate again. And it takes, you know, those kinds of things take a lot of kind of self-searching and self-focus, and a lot of let yourself be vulnerable and truthful about you know who you are in order to have those relationships. But I do find that once that if we can help them to reestablish some of those connections in society, and to create some healthy connections with their family, with their community, or you know, with faith, whatever it is that they really need, that can be really sustaining for them, for their work environment as well, and that can really make a big difference for their reestablishment into society. And it's definitely one of the success factors we've noticed, is them having that community and that support around them. So I think those kinds of relationships you're talking about are key to feeling successful in life, and work is a part of that, obviously.
Yeah, I agree. And I think do you want to say something? And I agree with the point you made earlier about training, because the training will also help you see sort of the resources and the skills you need to kind of navigate this in a more efficient or effective way. Sorry, okay, I took over the conversation. Yes, please.
Drawing a little bit of what you have been saying, like on the one hand before, you were saying that it's also important for the participants in your program to draw boundaries and to realize the borders they have. I'm wondering to some extent, which kind of borders do we actually need to challenge, and which kind of borders or boundaries might also help us to create spaces of belonging in a different form?
Question here.
You're going into, okay. Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah. You're completely right? Because some of these things that have become normalized are normalized to, I would say, again, maybe the ideal worker. And those norms that are only possible for a few people, those are the norms that we need to question. That does, I'm taking it back to the workplace because that's where I feel a little bit more comfortable. So in that workplace, I think there are definitely things that we need to question. There's also things that we would like to maintain. So for me, there is this whole discussion about professional work, right? And professionalism. And I guess you also just touched on that. And some degree or way of professionalism is important. If everybody brought their authentic self to work, yeah, exactly. Oh no. If all my colleagues do that, I want the day off, really. Because some sense of professional behavior is, you cannot just be your whole self to work. So authenticity, to a certain degree. Authenticity at work means something else than being authentic at home or with your relatives or with your siblings. So I think there is two ways of borders to maintain or borders to cross.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually think about what you said. I think almost in the kind of corporate or organizational environment, we should be maybe having some border discussions. Like, what are good borders? What are borders that you want to have, and what are borders that we don't want here? What are the ones that we want people to create for themselves, and which ones we want them not to exist between us? I don't know. I think that's interesting, and I definitely think I'm going to go back to my work, thinking about helping the women think about creating the right borders for themselves and breaking down the borders that they don't need in their life that are just holding them back.
Thought of something else as well. I think one other way of thinking about this is what I like to call diversity networks. When people that come from similar backgrounds work together, it's also sometimes called affinity groups. It's in the literature also sometimes called employee resource groups. But then for me, it already becomes a bit problematic because it's more than resource groups. It's more than just adding to the bottom line of the organization. They are also there to make some sense of community and losing the isolation, the feelings of isolation among people of minoritized groups. So I think those are also borders that we need to think about and that are sometimes there for very good reasons. So some of those networks, they open up to members, to all members, right? So members of the minoritized group and allies. And allies are very welcome there. But other networks are open to the members of the minoritized groups only, also probably for good reason. But these network groups are also seen as some of them have higher status. So the network for the young people tends to have a really high status in the organization. Organizations like them. The women's network, not so much. The fathers networks that are now being created in some contexts, they also have high status, usually because they consist of managers and they get more things done. So the status of the people also comes in their networking activities, which is also a set of boundaries that is very prevalent in today's, at least larger organizations.
Thank you, Yvonne. Let's just take one question from our online participants. So this is a question from Marcus. So there seems to be a trend at the moment, especially in African contexts, which suggests a high labor turnover, particularly for medium-sized SMEs. This trend is somewhat not unconnected to the growing sources of self-income generation, such as content creation, so online stuff, Ponzi schemes, and lottery. In the light of the above circumstance, getting sustained labor commitment is fast becoming a huge challenge, especially for small-scale businesses. What will you advise small and medium-scale enterprises facing labor challenges in this context? That's a deep question, actually.
Yeah. I would say talk to the people who are there and see what they need to stay. If they are happy in their jobs, if they have the feeling that they can enjoy the work that they do. So that might be about well-being as much as it is about income and about development opportunities. I think all of that might be important, but I don't know because I haven't spoken to the employees. I would say go immediately in a conversation with your employees to see what would it take to retain you here.
I think I've got a view on this. So I'm African, obviously. I think my view here is, so I have different identities. I'm British as well as Nigerian, and I've lived in both countries for a long time. And my answer to this question will come more from the institutional inadequacies of some of the African governments, which put pressure on small scale businesses to kind of go into a survival drive because they don't have institutional support, for example, and then they have to do what they can to survive. So I think in terms of advice for small businesses that are going through something like this, well, it's a case of enriching yourself with enough resources and enough knowledge to help you navigate a context or a landscape where you have less institutional support. Whereas if you compare that to a country like, for example, the United Kingdom, where you have government grants and you have different institutional support systems that could help small businesses thrive and kind of flourish regardless of the immediate circumstances they face. So yeah, so you have that the differences are there, and in my view, the trade-off for an African business in this interesting context is to self-develop and get the knowledge you need to help you transition from the challenges you have to something more sustainable for your business. I guess that's sort of how I would address this question, given that I have two perspectives. I have the perspective of a Nigerian business and also this perspective of living in the United Kingdom for a while now. Yeah, I guess that's sort of how I'll address this question. Do we have any question? Yes.
Hi, I'm Ara from Brunel University. For a disclaimer, I am a PhD student and I'm going to ask you a very stupid question that is related to my research. So I am a PhD student researching on social value in business. I wanted to understand the perspectives and thoughts from the panel from borders to maintain versus borders to cross in a situation where a business wants to become sustainable, they have to uphold their fair labor practices. Okay. On the other hand of the spectrum, there are communities who employees from vulnerable groups, example, child laborers or marginalized group women. Anyway, but according to fair labor practices, a company should not, and they have to uphold these values, should not do this. But then there is a tendency, these particular group can also work in illegal sectors, illegal work, and all of this. How does the business in this scenario can contribute to a bigger picture? Do they want to maintain their borders to maintain or borders to cross? Hope I made sense. No?
That's a really complicated question. A lot. I think it's great that you're doing a PhD on that. Yeah, that's a hard one. If I may, I'm going to take it a little bit broader. I think the idea of value-driven work is important. And if you claim as a business that you are value-driven, then it's very hard to sort of cross the boundaries of that value all the time. That you will lose legitimacy you will lose face. So that is going to be difficult. I'm thinking that's what we're seeing currently in lots of organizations that are dropping their former DEI statements. Right? They were already sometimes accused of pink washing. Others are accused of greenwashing. I think that is real, and if it's too easily to be dropped, that is when you see that happening. Indeed, I hope and have to believe that there are organizations that do take these values seriously and that do work from those values. Yeah, so they are there. And let's support them and show what they are doing in order for others to hopefully learn from that. Because that is a different type of work. But if you want to do this from particular values, I think it's really important that at least you are a bit of consistent with them.
Yeah, I think when it comes to sustainability and these kinds of things, when it becomes a part of your culture, and if you're going to make it a part of your, if you say that you are, then that is a border you do not cross. And I think that's important for recruitment and for the people that work for you and for them to feel like they're buying into what that organization is. And that is all about keeping those employees in place as well and making sure they stay and continue to provide value. So I think I don't know what I'd love to read your PhD, but I think, in the long run, I think that's a really important part now for any company that's developing to have that as part, to be very clear from the onset with that is part of their culture. And if it is, it's a border they don't cross.
Just one quick addition to what my colleagues have said. You might find, since you're doing a PhD on this, you might find this interesting. There's I can't remember the authors of this paper, but there's a paper I saw on LinkedIn on the differences between substantive business ethics and symbolic business ethics. So I think you might find this interesting because one of them, both types of ethics have to do with crossing of borders, because if you're doing genuine business ethics, then there are certain borders you wouldn't cross, right? If your ethics is symbolic, there are also borders you won't cross. But the question is, which are those borders and how do you determine what not to cross? So I think you might find that interesting as you develop your PhD further. But it's a really deep issue you're trying to address, and I'm curious to see what you have in store. I think we're out of time. 5 minutes more, okay. Can we just take one last quick question from the audience? I don't have any questions from the online participants. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Tracy. I'm also a PhD student from Brunel University. I have a quick question because this is also related to my research. Is the Uberization of the world and the definition of work in this digitalized, platform-based economy. Because I'm really impressed with how you said about meritocracy is just like a myth, and how you overcome that is you build community. I just want your thought on whether being able to build a community is also kind of a privilege, because Uber workers, for example, they don't have support from institutions, they don't have support from the organizations, and they are also prevented from forming communities because of the nature of their work, because of algorithm, because they are so separate from each other, it's impossible to form unions. So as researchers, as academia, what do you think we can do to provide them with the support, to give them, to not letting them fall through the cracks between the borders? Do you know what I mean?
Another interesting, is that part of your PhD as well? Or?
As a matter of fact, yes.
Oh, no.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. I'm thinking that work in the platform economy, in the wider sense, it brings up a whole new array of inequalities there that weren't there if not for the technological possibilities that enable those. I'm hoping that there are people with better ideas on how to overcome this, because my first go would be, let's see if we can get them together one way or the other, right? Because if they don't, changing this by yourself is going to be very difficult. And it's part of the business model, I guess, to keep these people separated and to keep them individualized. So I would be wanting to know about, but there must be people who are doing research on this, about how to overcome that and get them together in one way or the other. But I completely take your point about collective communities can be also a part of privilege. Yeah, I do take that point.
I mean, I do think those kinds of industries are really attractive to, or become more available to vulnerable communities, like the women I work with. You know, for them, when it becomes difficult for them to go into a company or an organization and get a job, it's much easier for them to work for an environment like that. And then it is just more and more. Makes them more and more vulnerable, makes them more and more separate from society, and it doesn't give them that feeling of community. So I think that is really something that will need to be addressed as we move forward in society and the world.
I think we're out of time here. Thank you so much for your engagement